So basically, yeah, today looking at real-world stuff, and we're going to start looking at some specific things that we're doing within our code base. So basically, just to start off really generally with some jQuery, some DOM, just to make sure that we're all on the same page with stuff. And I think a lot of today is going to be just making sure that we've all got the basics, so I don't mind kind of rushing through it and then taking questions at the end. If you want to select stuff, you use CSS. CSS selects for that. If you want to create stuff, some people haven't really experienced this one. If you want to create stuff, you put in a whole HTML element. So if you come across those two things in the code base, would you have known what they mean? Do you now know what they mean? Do you get what they do? Brilliant. In JavaScript, in jQuery, we can use CSS3 selectors regardless of what browser we're in. jQuery's gone back and added that to old browsers. But also we've got a kind of jQuery specific layer on top where they've said, right, wouldn't it be great to know which input's checked rather than which one's the first child? So they've kind of done that in the same sort of syntax. Now, one of the things that causes a lot of pain a lot of the time is how we traverse the DOM. Traversing the DOM is literally just moving between different DOM elements. And one of the simplest ones that you'll probably experience again and again is looking for a parent. Did you know that you can use .closest and it will look up any number of parents in the hierarchy for something that matches this? As soon as you find something, it's got it. So it doesn't matter if you've got your A and it gets deeper and deeper nested. As long as you're looking for something specific enough, then you're fine. The other cool thing about that is it's much more readable about what you're actually going to get out the other side. One thing not to confuse here is that parent also takes the parameter. But parent behaves differently. Parent will only, if you give it the parameter of .widget, it will only give you back an element if the direct parent has the class of widget. So it's two different things there. Getting all the children, it's actually not used as much as I thought it would be when I first saw it, because often you don't care about everything, you care about specific things. So if you want to find something specific, you can do this. Now, anything you say in here is relative to the A. So if you say a direct child of class specific child, so that's the angle bracket there, then it will only find it if it is the direct child of that A. So one thing that you get there is when you're traversing the DOM, you really do want to narrow your scope. So I've seen this sort of thing in a lot of different code bases, where we end up with we've got a widget called ABC, and then we look for something inside that widget, so we go ABC, A. Then we look for something inside those links, so we look for this. And actually, in this case, we've got the ID. It's going to be kind of scoped. IDs are only going to appear once on a page, and so, but actually, really, what we mean is this: find the widget, and inside that widget, find all the A's, and inside those A's, find something called specific. Now, this is both, I feel, more readable, but also it avoids. Sometimes around here, you end up with kind of string concatenation to build up your query to then run it. And it gets messy like that. But the big benefit here is that it's all scoped. We're going to look at the DOM widget pattern later, which basically means that each time that your widget appears on a page, you've naturally got a scope for it. So if you're looking for IDs on a page, then you're kind of breaking out of the scope you've been given and looking more globally again. And so it's really good to start moving much more towards this structure. Now, one thing that's kind of up for debate in our code base at the moment, sometimes it's used, sometimes it's not, is this dollar on the jQuery variables. I used to argue against it. I now actually quite like it. I've started using it pretty much all the time. The reason it's good is because if it is a jQuery element, you've got so many things you can do with it. You've got a level of safety. You don't need to do type checking. If it's not a jQuery element, then you've got to be a bit more careful with it. So if we like this convention, if we don't feel it's too close to Hungarian notation, then we could start enforcing it in code reviews. We could make sure that when things are jQuery variables, they're qualified with the dollar. If we actively don't like it, we can actively go and remove it. So we can have that conversation maybe at the end or whatever. But for the purpose of this, any jQuery elements are given the $. So when we practice traversing, we want to avoid things like this. I've seen it in code bases a few times. I've written it into code bases a few times, but it's much more useful, readable, safe to use something more like that. One thing that I can't believe is in the jQuery API is end. Can anyone tell me what I mean by this line?
Hide all the anchors and display the last one.
No.
What is, you need to know what end is doing.
Yeah,
You know
So-
what the line is doing.
Basically, end is part of the traversing API in jQuery, and I would suggest you never use it. What it's doing here...
I don't know what it does because
That's fine.
I've never used it. So I thought I don't need to use that, so I don't need to know what it is.
Absolutely. And I'm going to suggest that we literally never use this in our code base. So what it's going to do is it's going to look for the A, then it's going to find all the children of anything that was returned here. It's going to hide all the children, then end is going to say, right, now I'm done with the children, go back up to the A and show it. Now, there's a syntax that does that, which is storing whatever you got back here as a variable. Then you find the children and hide them, and then you go back to that variable you had and show it. So there's no need at all for the end. It's just a kind of how to make things into one long line rather than a few different logical groups. So I'm going to suggest that we go more into things like look up a few variables and then deal with them individually, rather than have this big kind of traverse down a path and then back up again. Does that make sense? Are we all happy to never ever use end? Good. One thing that I found has come up a few times in code reviews recently is whether or not what we're doing is associated with the DOM. So this, for example, is jQuery's way of hiding an element. It's definitely a DOM action. There's no doubt about it. And we know that because we're giving a meaningful element. When we say hide, it's object-oriented. We're saying the thing to hide is whatever I've just given you. $.ajax is jQuery's way of loading in Ajax things. It's not associated with the DOM, so it's just on $. It's not on a particular element. Now, the kind of practical difference of where you add that, I'm not going to dig in too far into this because I'm going to show you more how we do it than how jQuery do it. But if you want to create a function alongside hide, you add it to $function. If you want to add something alongside Ajax, you add it to $. So $.myFn, my function, will run just like $.ajax. But $.function.myfunction will run more like this, so every element will have it. The two examples that I've seen, there's this one which basically says, I don't care what elements, I'm not actually going to tell you what elements, but I want personalization log out. And another one which in this context there are maybe 20, 30 different things that are all started on body. I'm going to look through them. This one's not from our code base. When I looked through them, I found that none of them actually refer to body at all. They're just kind of a pile of helpers, event listeners, kind of more functional things. So these two should basically either be like this or not attached to jQuery at all. If they're not interacting with the DOM, they really shouldn't be associated with DOM elements.
I think it was interacting with the DOM. I can't remember how.
If there's nothing in here, so the question that I've started to ask here is, what's your this? If you're going in to listen for events and you're not making use of this, then you don't care what you were given here, and therefore actually you shouldn't have been given anything. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was just thinking the personalization one. I think I might have written that.
Okay, that's all right.
And I just can't remember what it was doing, but it does the personalization method does modify DOM elements.
So essentially, if it should modify some DOM elements, they should be listed in here. And when you call personalization, it should only refer to the elements it was given. And we can go back and we can look
I
at
can't
specific
remember.
examples. But in general, when you find yourself doing something that's kind of assigned to the DOM, but then you're not actually using this, you're not using the elements you were given, then it's probably a sign that you don't actually want to be doing it on the DOM, on the DOM elements. So, I'm going to go through a few examples of little bits that we're actually doing, and they come with this warning. Because everything should always iteratively improve, what you're about to see is the current version. It will evolve over time, and so what I'm hoping to show you is the attitudes behind it rather than specific implementation. So I'm going to be showing you kind of how things are done today. It might be that if in 2 months' time you start to have a look at it, they're done a bit differently. That's fine, that's part of iterative improvement. But what I want to show you is how it's starting to make things easier. So, DOM widget pattern. You might have heard me talk about this one. The DOM widget pattern comes out of a few problems that are quite common. One is this sort of thing, where you create a widget called myWidget, you create a class called myWidget, and you say anything that's got the class myWidget uses myWidget. So then you've got this pile of classes throughout the DOM that, because of this kind of manual coupling, it means that when you add the class myWidget, it's going to add a pile of behaviour to that element. The other one is the stuff here where you say, right, this specific element should have this specific behaviour. Now, I think there are times when these things can work, but basically, I feel that this is better documented as this, where you say, right, the widget I'm using here is my widget, and it can also have classes, it can have other stuff, but you're being really explicit to say that actually this my widget thing refers to the behaviour rather than the style. Then the second one, slightly bigger because it requires a something parameter. So here we've got a data widget, and then when we want to inject the parameter, actually we've got another attribute on there with the parameter. Now, HTML5 allows you to have any attribute starting with data hyphen, and it's intended to only be meaningful within the scope of your web page. It's not something that will be passed by search engines or affected by browsers or anything like that. It's only for you to use.
I was going to say that the other reason that's good is the good reason of not using a class to show a widget is if you are repurposing something and you remove a class because you think it's based on styling, then you are also removing like all the JavaScript associated with it. So that would actually prevent that.
Yeah. Essentially, my argument with the DOM widget pattern is that it makes it explicit what you're doing at what stage, and essentially at some point you do need a coupling. You do either need to say that any URL within a nav, within a header, has to have this element. But actually the reality is in our sort of situation that's going to be a widget that's got a template. And so it's much better to drop into the template what hook you're using for the JavaScript and then create that somewhere in JavaScript and it's all good. You haven't got to do that third step of coupling them together. Cool? Does that make sense? Lovely. So, DOM widget pattern for dependency injection. This is something that we're finding particularly useful. If we've got a data widget defined as tm.omniture.linkTracker, then by convention we're loading in a source file of resources.js tm omniture. Now this is kind of the second evolution. It's bound to carry on further. We started off with a folder called omniture and a file called linktracker, and we found that was loading too many files in, it was taking too long. And so we basically said, right, when you start to look for any widget inside Omniture, actually it should load the whole of Omniture. And when you ask for any widget inside what's on, it should load the whole of what's on. Now inside that file, what you'll see is tm.createWidget, and we name the widget as we want it named, and we give it a function. Now what this avoids is there's a very specific way that you boilerplate a jQuery plugin, and it's about 6 lines long. And if you get it a bit wrong, then it doesn't quite behave right. And this is to avoid all of that. You stick anything you want in that function, and it will run once for every instance of linktracker. Now, one of the common problems with the jQuery boilerplating is if you don't get it right, and you end up basically you run this sort of thing, and that there is no class of my widget on the page, it still does its initialization, it still loads event handlers and whatever else, but it's just got nothing to assign them to. Whereas with this one, if it doesn't appear on the page, then your function never gets run. If it appears 3 times, the function gets run 3 times. So feel free to go and have a play with that one. Other little example there is the what's on menu, and these are literally pulled from our code base this morning. So again, loaded by convention, and then that's the definition of it. So the aim here is that you create a file in the right place. You create your create widget. You use create widget to create a widget, and then you literally just drop that anyway. Convention over configuration is a general thing. I think I might have just covered this. So it's pretty much what I've just described. DOM widget pattern is so easy to implement. It can be down to 3 lines, pretty much. Simplified it a little bit by not actually loading it here. Anything that's got a data widget attribute, for every one of them, go through, find the widget, then got to figure out how, whether it already exists or not. So there's a couple more lines there. But that's the essence of how we hook into it. It's really, really simple.
Is that run on document.ready? Or?
That's run on document ready. It's also run before document ready, I believe. I believe it's run on the end of the page. And I'm going to go through in a minute about how you can also run it at specific times. Because there are some things that aren't on the page when it loads, and you still want this behavior on there. So we'll go through that in a minute. This one here. So if you've loaded something into Ajax, and it's got data widgets on, either before or after you drop it in the page, you can do .load DOM widgets. What that will do is exactly what would have happened if it was on the page when it loads. It will see if those are already loaded and deal with that. There's another way you can do it, which can be quite nice, particularly for unit tests, where you give an element that doesn't have that decoration, and you say actually load name DOM widget. At that point, it goes through the exact same process, but without having to kind of clutter the DOM, just to use it once. So I feel that this one adds back in any power that you might be missing if you did want to do something more custom with it. Does that answer your question? Cool. One thing to say is, this one up here, I want to say that should be done every time we load anything from the DOM, anything from Ajax, just in case. But the reality is that if you're loading something that needs initializing, you'll know that it needs initializing. So hopefully, that's the most that you'll have to do. And this is DOM widget pattern is partly to get around a problem where you can have all these kind of all of these things set up in one place so that they run on page load, but after page load they're lost. So if you're Ajaxing something in, you've got to know which widgets it should be calling, which makes a really tight coupling throughout your code base. So, yeah. There you go. This is the warning. If you don't like this, then you might not like DOM widgets. Basically, this is pulled from our live site of what's on, and this is all of the boilerplate we needed to get the search results loading. So we've got the template base so that we know where to load our templates from. We've got the requests we're making to our third party that provides the data. We've got patterns coming back for how we do the links. And basically, this is all of the configuration that would need to go somewhere. And it's the configuration between the back end and the front end. So the reason why I like DOM widget pattern is because it puts all of this into one known place. You're not hunting around trying to figure out where it is. You can view source and you can see exactly what configuration it's been given and exactly how it should be running. This is the only thing I find isn't kind of clean about DOM widget pattern, but I don't think it's a showstopper. Anyone like it? Not like it? Got any thoughts on how it could be improved? It's good.
think that's the only widget that we have with more than 3 data elements.
Yeah.
Because the rest of the widgets, they just got 1 or 2, and it doesn't look really that around.
Absolutely. And there's something we're going through elsewhere to have a global configuration. It's the stuff that we've been working on together. And the idea of the global configuration is maybe things like the template base, and yeah, only the template base really should be in global configuration once rather than on every widget. But yeah. Okay. A quick note on performance here. Some people would say that DOM widgets aren't performant. I'd like to point out jQuery.
What do you mean by it's an equilibrium?
So, there are 2 cases that are the 2 extremes. What I mean by the equilibrium is you can go too far one way or the other, and it's a bad thing. You've got to find the right balance between the 2 for good performance. So let me give you the 2 extremes. So case 1, I worked somewhere where they loaded everything just in case it was needed. So I was told that if a user's got 10 credit cards, then the delete credit card button needs to be all kind of primed and ready to run with everything it needs. So the moment the user clicks it, it fires in. So that means we've got 10 delete your credit card lightboxes all loaded on page load before the user is allowed to interact with anything, just in case. So that's one step of kind of too far one way. The other is everything's lazy loaded. You get to the point where you load your page and before the user can do anything, they have to wait for various levels of lazy loading. And I'll go through some stuff here. So does that answer your question about the 2 extremes? So my recommendation, I haven't got a straightforward answer, and I am going through some of this with what's on. And while thinking about this with what's on, I've realised that I've gone too far one way.
Which way?
So, towards the lazy loading.
Okay.
Because we're lazy loading everything, the product managers are starting to realise that the product owners are starting to realise that it takes a little while to kick in. If they're noticing, the users will be noticing. So my suggestion is discuss performance with your product owner. If you're not sure whether something should be primed and ready or whether it should be lazy loaded, talk to them about it. How likely is it that the user's going to click this button? If it's 100%, like if this is the main call to action, this is really, I don't know, it's the continue button on a whole process, then yeah, you want it to be primed and ready. If it's some kind of side thing that they might do, then there's a bit more forgiveness if it takes a moment. Look at your usage stats. If you think it's something that everyone's going to click and actually no one clicks it, then why is it primed and ready the whole time? I would suggest, other people would disagree, don't compromise code readability for performance in any language, in anything. There are lots of performance enhancements we can make throughout the whole code base by doing things like minifying scripts, loading them at better times, stuff like that, and actually keep the times when we try and code around the performance issues or the potential performance issues, quite often we leave ourselves with a much harder problem to solve. And this is bearing in mind that JavaScript in the browser tends to be single-threaded. So we download our main script files, we execute them. First level of dependency is lazy loads, and we execute them. Next level of dependency, lazy loads, and execute. If your key behaviour for your page is somewhere down here, then of course it takes a while to kick in because it's behind a few layers. So one of the things that I've done to help us with our DOM widget performance is before requesting the file that contains the DOM widget, we're checking whether it's already on the page. That means that, for example, in what's on, in fact, I think I cover this more specifically. Aha, that's better.
Well, can I just,
yep.
I was going to cover this anyway. Is historically we've been using lab.js a lot. Where does that fit into all this? Are we not using it anymore?
DOM widget. Our implementation of DOM widget pattern uses lab.js to load its resources.
Okay.
So what I've done basically is put a layer on top of lab.js to say, right, these resources known by tm.something exist in this path, and then telling lab.js to go off and load the path.
Okay.
So what we've done historically is we've told lab.js the exact file to load, and I'm trying to get away from files and into concepts. but it's still lab.
What about, should we switch to require, or is that?
We can switch to require, and there are some benefits to that. And I think that one of the things that I want to investigate is when you're creating those files, I believe that in require, you wouldn't actually need to name the widget in here. Essentially, we need to name this tm.omniture in 2 different places. And actually, the file's already called tm.omniture. So, for example, in a Java project, you don't name your class, including the namespace. Whereas in this, you do have to name it, including the namespace. And I'd like to see if require can get us around that, so that we just say, right, inside this file, whatever it's called, we're creating a link tracker.
Yeah.
And then we call the file omniture and go from there. So require might solve some of these problems. And my aim generally, and I'll go through this right at the end, is to recognise repeated patterns and basically by recognising patterns and consolidating them, we can then figure out how it should all be implemented without changing the whole code base. So,
is there a way to track all these dependencies so that you know what's going on the page, and if your one is further down in the...
You can view it in the network tab. Network tab in Chrome is pretty good at looking at this stuff. There are tools out there that will give you what's called a waterfall diagram, where it literally shows all of the things that load and what times they load and stuff like that, and they can be great for performance testing. In terms of specifically DOM widgets with with our dependency injection, if you get to the page and your widget is obviously not there, your click handlers aren't working, whatever, and then they kick in, that means that you've got that time. That's. I'm less worried about the performance metrics at this stage, and I'm more worried about what the user experience is from that. It might be that turns into performance metrics.
The only reason I ask is because I know with the quizzes it takes a little while to be able to click on anything.
So, I'd like to start solving that. I think this one goes through it there. So, what's loaded on every page? Might be an obvious answer. A lot of people get this wrong. Things that load on every page should be used on every page, or things that are used on almost every page. Sometimes when the performance is high enough business priority. So if there's something like a buy now button, if it's a kind of subscribe, and actually they just want that to be really snappy, even though it only appears on whatever, that's fine. The business can have stuff like that. Everything else should be lazy loaded. The problem with lazy loading is if you're relying on something that is lazy loaded and you're trying to access it beforehand, well, behaviour's not there.
I mean, how does this fit in with, like, we've got the JavaScript minification widgets?
Yes.
I mean, we're putting in there things that are used on every page, and then everything else is lazy loaded then.
Basically, everything in the JavaScript minification widget is there on page load. Everything else is done through lab.js or indirectly kind of via DOM widgets and things like that. There's something that I'm kind of curious about. So it says we could, I'm asking myself the question, could we, as I'm going through this, could we put what's on JS inside a minifier widget on all the pages of what's on? And then, it literally, if we went and did that one in configuration and production right now, then it wouldn't load what's on .js, it wouldn't lazy load it, it would already be on the page. And therefore all of the widgets would already be just injected straight in. So for example, the quizzes, if there's some configuration that says actually this page has got a quiz in, maybe we could put it in a minifier widget. Maybe there's better ways.
What would be tricky would be putting it in the same minifier widget. In other words, making it so that they were combined with all the ones that are on all the other pages, as opposed to just being a separate minifier widget.
For a purpose like what's on, I wouldn't be too afraid of having 2 different minifier widgets. We want everything from the site plus our layer, and having those 2 different things. If it got to the point where it's like, right, this page includes 10 different things, so we need 10 different minifier widgets, then it's probably starting to get a bit too far down that line. One of the things that require.js can do is it can pre-compile the dependencies, because you're actually listing, I don't know, what's on .js requires jQuery, it requires underscore, it requires whatever else. Actually, you can pre-bundle those in with one thing. It can be good, it can be bad. Sometimes it means you end up loading jQuery twice because two different things bundled it. So it's not always a good thing. There's lots of questions we can ask there. My general aim, though, is that we can have that sort of question, and we can come up with a plan at some point in the future that we can retrospectively fit to what we've already done. So using more helpers, using more abstraction there, allows us to actually fix problems without changing the code base. So this is my attempt for making lazy loading really easy. It's just again, just like the DOM widgets, this has got a convention to it. It's actually got a slightly different convention at the moment. It's all up for debate. We can discuss whether it's helpful having a different convention or not. But this will load the file resources.js tm helpers something.js. The slight difference is if it were a DOM widget, it would load all of helpers. So I don't know whether that's helpful or not. We can figure that one out. But what it means that inside that file you can define your tm.something, and then whenever that file gets loaded, we know that tm something exists, and so it gets injected into there. The other thing that require does, which is quite nice, is it gives you back your dependencies as parameters in your functions here. So if we did have more of that sort of structure, then actually you wouldn't be accessing globally tm.something. You'd just be going, right, I want help as something, and this, I don't know, I'd call the variable something, or, yeah, I'd just call it something. And then I'd just use the function something, the library something, whatever it is that I'm expecting back. But at the moment, all of this stuff exists in our code base. So we're using it particularly for things like handlebars. If we're trying to load handlebars in, then we go through this. So we load tm with resource, I think it's lib.handlebars.
So is that if you're trying to execute the handlebars on the client, you mean?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So like with some Ajax type requests, we do that too.
Exactly. So we lazy load the script in, and then we Ajax for the other thing,
Yeah.
for the actual template. And we're currently going through a process there, and I haven't presented it here because it's not finished, but about how we can standardise the way that we load the handlebars templates in. So I'm looking at a kind of tm get template, and then you give it again a name like this to access that template, and then it gives you back a handler that you can then call and say, right, now render that to this element. And basically, again, this is kind of recognising pain points and trying to figure out how we can standardise them. Core scripts. Did you know in our code base now, core.js is made up of any file listed in that text file, and it's included on every page.
Yeah.
This means if we decide that underscore should be a dependency for all of our JavaScript, we can download underscore, we can commit it to our repository, and we can add a line to core dependencies.txt, and in the next front-end release, we'll have underscore on every page. That was tricky before, and now I believe it's really simple. But it comes back to that thing, what do you really want on every page? So
how is that tricky? Like putting it in the minifier widget, wouldn't that put it on every page?
So putting it on the minifier widget for every site would put it on every page. What we found, what I found tricky was every time we went to new environments, it needed adding. Every time that we were testing something, and the config got refreshed from live, it needed re-adding. And basically, in the What's On project, this caused a lot of pain. And so this was.
But it is true that you could work around it manually with minifier widgets.
Yeah. But with 30 sites and tablet and desktop, we're looking at adding it to 60 different minifier widgets. So the big thing there is that there was a bit of a race condition on how we could do it, because we had to add the file, put that live, then change the minify widget to access that file, then put live the things that required that file. We couldn't in one release say this is a new dependency and we're using it.
Little brother creates core.js based on what's in core dependencies.
Yeah. One of the things that's in core dependencies is the config widget we're working on at the moment. So there's a version of it in there, and that's also got DOM widgets in. So DOM widgets on every page. It's got lab.js, and basically I'm going to try and use. Actually, sorry, that's the other problem that comes with the minify widget. Is at the moment there's slightly different versions of jQuery being used in different places. So I'm hoping to pull things like jQuery back from minify widgets into core, so that if you want to upgrade the jQuery version, then we can just add it, change it in the code base, add it to this text file, and it's in.
I mean, I don't know, is core going to end up replacing the minify widget?
I don't think it does, and I don't think it should, because the good thing about the minify widget is it's configurable in runtime. So if we do find a big problem, we can add something at runtime. But I would hope that the only thing in the minify widget is core. I think if we're doing our jobs right, then everything that's really needed is in there, and then if minify widget's only used for kind of quick fixes when it.
Well, and the recaching as well.
So the recaching's dealt with, yes. So because the minify widget does the recaching, we're kind of hooking into that. So even if it was just core that was in there, then you've still got benefit.
You've got three. The minify widget was three things. It was recaching, concatenation, and minification.
Yeah.
So it's. I mean, even if you only need one of those, it's still useful.
And the amount of times, as we've rolled out the core.js thing, the amount of times I've had the question, oh, well, this one's slightly different from this, so which one's the right one? I don't know which one the right one is. But I do know that they shouldn't have been different in the first place. So.
I didn't realise we had different versions of jQuery.
The big one is
wrong.
tablet and desktop.
Oh,
tablet and desktop use different versions.
Well, just because they're using jQuery mobile, or even beyond that?
The jQuery that we're using, not jQuery mobile, the one that jQury mobile then hooks into, is different.
Oh.
And the file name.
How did that happen?
And the file name is called jQuery whatever.patched, which is never something I like to see.
Oh my god.
So, but basically, core is kind of, I suppose, it's come out of my reaction to each of those different things. So, that's quick warning. Not everything is core.
Well, then you go to is it case one of your equilibrium otherwise, wouldn't you?
Exactly. Where we say, right, everything has to be primed, ready to run, whatever, let's have it on the page. And that just slows everything down. Yeah. I'd like to just go into one really specific thing that's kind of, having just said lazy loading's easy, sometimes lazy loading's not quite so easy. So I'm going to show you this one, and we'll start discussing it, but we're not going to go into a code example today. If we want to dig more into code examples, we can do that. But there is something that can be quite nice. If you're using Ajax to load something with jQuery, and you've got some kind of action, let's say it's just, I don't know, you're waiting for particular things to be ready on the page, and then when they are, it all takes a while, and so you want to do something deferred here. And you're going to ask the user a question. They might take any amount of time to answer it. You've got three things now that are unpredictable. What you can do, jQuery gives you this power, $.when. You give it the three different things you're waiting for, and a function to run once they're done. And it doesn't matter what order they're done in, it'll run. There are lots of kind of side issues that come out of that. When you start playing with that, you'll realise that it's not quite as simple as I'm making it look. But just in terms of the scenario that I've seen again and again is we load handlebars.js for the handlebars compilation, and we load a particular template and we load particular data. But quite often what we're doing is we're doing them one at a time. We're saying, right, load handlebars, when that's done, load the template, then when that's done, load the data. And it takes a long time. Whereas if we just start all of those things at once and then can be clever about when they finish, it adds a lot of power. So all that I'm looking to say about this today is bear in mind that it exists. If you want to find out about it, you can Google about it, I don't mind showing you, that sort of thing. But if we want to, like we've had that kind of breakout session we've been doing the config widget, once we're done with the config widget, maybe we want to
We should just have a standard way of doing the handlebars on the client.
and that is what we're working on at the moment.
I mean, we've got a story which says enable they to use the compiled handlebars.
Yes.
So at the moment it doesn't even use the compiled one. You still need the client library to just execute the compiled template against the context.
And one of the problems with that task is that everywhere that we use the handlebars template, we need to detect whether it's already compiled or not. So actually, if we can put that into one place, then it's cool. Which comes back to this thing, okay? How to progress. So, we identify repeated problems. Handlebars, different dependencies, whatever it is. We work together to create a syntax which resolves them. So anyone who's interested in that handlebars syntax, I've got a current recommendation. Can gather around my computer in 2 hours' time. We can figure out whether it's actually a good one or not. TDD a solution means that it's reliable. We unit test this stuff. It allows iterative improvement later on. So we move over the existing code to that structure. So when we do that handlebars one, what we're going to do is go across the whole code base, change all the instances.
There's
over
not
to the new
that
structure.
many, are there?
14 at the moment.
14. I thought it was just polls and quizzes. Is there more than that?
What's on,
What's on,
and
okay.
a couple of other things as well. But yeah, 14 instances of using handlebars.
10 other things, you mean?
Uh,
Or 11?
well,
What's on polls?
what's on used it a few times.
Okay.
Yeah. We create new code using that structure. That's with we move over the existing stuff, and when we create new stuff, we use that new structure. We iteratively improve the solution. I think that's the end. Document it with tests. One of the things we're going to look at next week is unit testing, and I'm going to show you Jasmine in a bit more detail. I'm going to show you Jasmine Query, which is a tool for unit testing jQuery projects with Jasmine, and we're going to look at how we can do that stuff. But one of the things I'd really like us to figure out as a group is how to document your work with tests. Ideally, because this stuff's going to iteratively improve, we want to make sure the usage examples don't break. So one way or another, it would be great to say, right, here's 3-4 different examples of how you can use this tool. And they're tested. If the tests go red, then we know we've broken the example and we need to change it. I think that's the end. Yeah. Cool. Any questions? No? Cool. We've got Room B booked in for Wednesday at 1 o'clock for another continuation of that config thing. We'll go.
Do send meeting invites, because I always forget when it's not a meeting invite.
I forget when things aren't meeting invites, and then I forget to send out meeting invites. So I'll make sure that I'll make sure that I send it out. And basically, we'll carry on with that config widget until everyone's bored of it, until enough people are bored of it, and then we'll move on to something else or nothing at all, or whatever. Cool. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.